pleasure for me to introduce our guest. She's a friend. Not everyone that comes to the City Club is someone that I actually know, but I have the privilege of her friendship. When she wrote The Overworked American, when she was teaching at Harvard College, I thought that was a great book, an important book. I thought she was terrific. Then she wrote The Overspent American, and now she's written a book called Born to Buy. She's been featured on 60 Minutes too. She's quoted extensively in the national media. I think every time she goes to the messages on her cell phone, the Washington Post or the New York Times or someone else is calling. She moved from Harvard to Boston College. She's married. She has two wonderful children that I've had the privilege of meeting. She is one of the great Boston Red Sox fans. And yesterday in Denver, when she spoke to the Denver Forum, the two of us had breakfast, and this is almost bordering on overdose, but we talked about baseball for 2 hours. There are not a whole lot of people you can talk to about baseball for 2 hours with who are really knowledgeable. She is really knowledgeable. What she will say today is of incredible importance in my judgment. I hope you will listen closely. Would you welcome, please, from Boston College, the great Dr. Juliet Schor.
Thanks so much. It's a great honor to be here. It has been said, I think quite wisely, that the measure of a society is the way it treats its children. And I think by this rubric, our country is falling perilously short. Let me start with a few examples of some of the kinds of things that are happening to American children today. Number one, the growth of obesity and overweight, which has more than tripled in recent decades, and by some measures, looks to be at about 25% of American kids are now overweight or obese. In the year 2000, it is estimated that a third of the children who were born that year will develop type 2, that is weight-related diabetes. This is especially a problem among African American and Latino children. And one of the clues to why it's happening is the fact that now the number one source of calories in children's diets in America is sugared drinks. Number one source of calories. Example 2, mental health. Record numbers of American children and teens are depressed, anxious, attempting suicide, diagnosed with a variety of behavioral and related disorders like ADHD, or victims of substance abuse. Here's one, I think, chilling statistic. The average level of anxiety as measured today in, psychologists go out and have measures of how anxious people are. The average level of measured anxiety in American youth today is equivalent to the levels that were measured in psychiatric clinics of patients, inpatients, children in the year 1957. So what was sufficient to get you into a psychiatric facility in 1957, that's the level of anxiety that the average American kid is living with today. Number 3, youth are consuming alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs at alarming rates, fueled, and this is really incredible when we step back just for a minute and think about it, fueled by pervasive advertising of these commodities that they are not only exposed to, but in some cases, like alcohol, more exposed to alcohol advertising, which they are not supposed to be exposed to, than legal age drinkers. What is the favorite ad of American boys aged 8 to 14, year after year after year? The ad companies do surveys of what's the favorite ad of kids? It's a Budweiser commercial. No matter what that commercial is, year after year, they tend to get top spot. Or consider this, that after the tobacco settlement, which made marketing cigarettes and tobacco to kids illegal, the amount of advertising that children were exposed to, the amount of tobacco advertising, increased, not went away. And here's another one. If you remember, in the year 2000, the Clinton administration asked the Federal Trade Commission to do a report about the fact that it had heard the Hollywood studios were marketing R-rated movies to 9 and 10-year-olds, pulling them in for focus groups before the movies, deliberately marketing these R movies to them. That raised a hue and cry, not unlike what happened with Janet Jackson and the wardrobe malfunction at the Super Bowl last year, or the Desperate Housewives things with the NFL recently. And the studios agreed to clamp down on the R movies, and actually now you do have to have a parent or guardian to get into them. But what did the studios do after they agreed to this reform? Look at the PG-13s. They're what the Rs were. Huge increase in violence, increase in sex, and a disproportionate increase in smoking in PG-13 movies. None of that is an accident. Finally, fourth example, the rise of materialist values and brand obsession and kind of intense desires around consumer goods that we see among American youth. The number one aspiration of our children in America today is no longer to be a great athlete or to be smart or to be a celebrity, the kinds of things that in the past came at the top of the list when surveyors asked them, what do you want for your life? What do you want to be when you grow up? The number one aspiration of American youth today is to be rich. And that those intensified levels of materialism that we see among young people play out in a lot of different ways. One of the most destructive is the fact that increasingly young people create their sense of identity and the social dynamics that they live in, the peer dynamics of not just teenagers, but kids, even as young as in elementary school, are by what you have, what you've bought, the kinds of shoes you wear, the clothes, the brands that you are able to get. Social dynamics in schools are more tied up than ever with wanting, getting, spending, and having. Now, why is this happening? What are its impacts? And is there a connection between the thing I ended with, materialism, and the ones I began with, obesity and overweight, mental disorders, and so forth? I believe there is. Now, historically, if we think about the ways in which adults have approached the problems of kids, both from the academy, the policy side, and in communities, we have focused on we have focused on family and the idea of family dysfunction, issues of child care, poverty, education. These, of course, are all crucial. We have thought that when kids have problems, it's caused by problems in these areas. And so almost all of our policy interventions, our money, our programs, et cetera, go to those topics. But what if the media and consumer culture with which kids spend more time than they do in schools, they spend more time with media and consumer culture than they do by far with their parents or their caregivers, what if this has become a key influence on children's development? That means we adults need to refocus the ways in which we view the environments in which children are being raised and begin to address what I believe has become a persistent threat to children's well-being. How did I come to these conclusions, and what can be done? Well, beginning in the year 2000, I started doing research which culminated in the publication of this book on the ways in which children are being marketed to and the impacts that that is having on them. I was lucky enough to get inside advertising agencies, and that's tough because it's a very secretive industry. But I was placed as a kind of, researcher, a sort of fly on the wall inside a major New York agency. And I was placed with a children's marketing group to see what it is they're doing, what they're thinking, what are their strategies, how are they approaching kids, how do they talk about kids, and how do they feel about what they're doing. Just on that point, I can tell you a lot of them feel very guilty which they should. I also conducted over 40 interviews and I had about 20 presentations from people, so I did a lot of one-on-one. I went to marketing conferences and so forth. I also did a survey of 300 10 to 13-year-old kids in a group of urban and suburban schools, 5 different schools in the Boston area. And the sample runs the gamut from schools which are predominantly African American and Latino to affluent suburban schools. And interestingly, I found some very similar findings in both these settings. Now, the first thing I found is that children's consumer culture and the way they relate to consumer culture it's a totally different world from what existed in the past and from what existed for most of us growing up, and that with the exception of our friends here, young friends here from high school. But even things have really changed for today's younger kids as compared to people who are today in high school, like our guests. In the marketing world, children's marketing was once a sleepy backwater. It was a low-status place. There were very few of the more creative people in the field who went into it. There was very little money directed at it and almost no research. And the reason is not hard to figure out. It's because kids didn't have much money. And advertisers were not going to devote a lot of money to markets that were not all that lucrative. That's the thing that has changed, which has then made possible a dramatic transformation in the way marketers relate to kids. It's estimated now that children aged 0 to 12 have over $30 billion of their own money to spend each year. Teens have about $170+ billion of their own. So this is a big market. But even that $30 billion, which by the way comes from we parents and grandparents for the most part, this is the, all that money we're showering on them, allowances, gifts, and so forth. That pales in comparison to the second aspect that marketers have figured out and picked up on a big way, which is that kids are influencing the purchases that their parents make. That market they estimate at about $670 billion, growing 20% a year. It is huge. It's not only food, where, by the way, children are the most important deciders now in families with kids of what goes into that shopping basket. But the marketers have done extensive surveys, and I've also found this in I've been around the country talking to lots of audiences, including young people, that kids are weighing in on purchases you can hardly believe. Automobiles. The Chrysler Corporation advertises on Nickelodeon Channel. Now, these people don't have driver's license, but they are telling their parents. This started with the Rugrats. The original automobile advertising to kids started with Rugrats. So those kids would go and tell their parents, buy the Chrysler minivan. My daughter came home with a Toyota advertisement from school last year. When I went to the kids' marketing conferences, there were representatives there. I did an interview with someone from the Ford Motor Company. It's also true with technology, where many of us will acknowledge that the young people in our homes know much more about high-tech products than we do, and we turn to them. Marketers know that. It's true for tourist destinations, hotels, a whole range of products that parents spend money on, but kids are increasingly the ones driving those brand choices. Marketers increasingly are going to kids as the key, the sort of epicenter of consumer culture. By the way, they call it nag factor, and they have very sophisticated ways of getting kids to nag us, parents, to buy brands. And my organization, the Center for a New American Dream, has done really interesting studies on this about the ways in which kids persistently nag, repeated askings. Advertising to children is at an all-time high. When I started doing this research, the estimates were about $2 billion a year in money directed at kids. I had to change quickly, as the book was coming out, because the numbers are rising so quickly. $15 billion is the last figure that's been published. That was in about 4 years. incredible explosion in the amount of money that's being directed at kids. Kids, the number of commercials that kids saw doubled between the 1970s and the 1990s. That hasn't been updated more recently, but even by the mid-90s, it was 110 just TV commercials a day. But they're also being advertised in lots of other places. The public schools have become a huge arena for marketers to go in, and they advertise junk food advertising, Channel 1, which is a commercial advertising. And one of the things I expose in my book in a lot of detail is the use of sponsored educational, quote-unquote, curricula, that is ads in the guise of curriculum. So we have the energy companies writing curriculum on environment, telling us that global warming is not a problem, or incineration is a form of recycling. This is the kind of stuff that's coming through in these. We have junk food companies writing nutrition curricula and so forth. Kids are tied into brands as never before. The research shows that by 18 months old, they are identifying brands. By 2 years old, they are asking for products by brand name across a whole wide range. By 3, kids in America today are connecting their own personal characteristics, their identities with brands. Because by age 3, they have already had incredible exposure to advertising. PBS, I'm sorry to say, brought us television for 1-year-olds, Teletubbies. They have fast food promotions with fast food companies, McDonald's, Burger King. So from the earliest ages, there are even infant websites kids are being marketed to, repetitively having ads flashed at them. Inside the agencies, I found that there is an incredible, intensive research effort going on. Once they decided to commit all that money, of course, they've got to make sure that they're using it wisely. I interviewed people who do research inside homes. They do intensive videotaping of kids to find out every little thing about them, how they eat, how they groom, how they play. I interviewed researchers who sit in bathrooms and watch kids take baths to figure out how to make new health and beauty aids to sell new products to them. And there's also something called neuromarketing going on, which is the use of MRIs to probe consumers' brains to figure out how to make ads that we will not be able to resist. And that brain science has begun to filter down to teens. And I even found one person who was doing MRI screening with young people. They have crafted a set of very sophisticated messages which are very appealing to kids. One of the things you can note is also the characters that they use. They use brain science to figure out which kinds of characters kids will not be able to take their eyes off, or which kinds of logos will be so mesmerizing to them. They have shifted from what we might call functional advertising, in which they advertise products on the basis of what the product does, like, this toy is fun to play with, this food tastes good, to what we could call symbolic advertising, which is all about the social meanings of the goods. And this is one of the reasons products have become so much more important in kids' social dynamics. The number one theme of kids' advertising today is cool. The product is cool. Whether it's a candy, I mean, what a weird idea that a candy is cool. We can see it for fashion items or shoes or whatever, whether it's candy or macaroni and cheese or a toy, you name it, the marketing of cool is at the center. And what you find now is that young kids, even kids in like 3rd grade, care about being cool. That has become a value that marketers have pushed now pretty strongly. There are other things they're doing. One of them is called age compression, where they market teen and adult products to kids or use teen and adult messages in the commercials and ads that they direct at kids. This is also called tweening, this idea that there's a group just under the teen age, which is no longer kids. How old is that tween group? This is the demographic which is supposed to have come out of childhood but isn't quite yet into adolescence. They define it as 6 to 12. That's why they're marketing sexy fashions, sexualized music, makeup, violence to little kids, to 6-year-olds. They also are very keen on specifically breaking up the market and targeting specific demographics. So, for example, when Kraft and the other junk food companies got increased scrutiny for their role in the growth of childhood obesity, what was Kraft's, notwithstanding their, the good thing that they did this week, which is said they're going to stop marketing their the worst products to this demographic. We'll see if they actually go through with that. But their statement to investors as they came under pressure as public awareness of the obesity problem increased, if you went to their website and looked at their statement to investors, it was, "We will aggressively increase our efforts in marketing to the African American and Latino communities." That's their response. There's targeted marketing conferences for Hispanic youth, for African American youth, most vulnerable, particularly vulnerable targets. They're very involved also in a kind of world of stealth advertising, whether it's product placements, which are a huge new area, advertising to kids without their realizing that they're being advertised to, advergaming, which is the branding of games on the internet and also putting brand products in video games, and using ads in a deceptive way, things that look like public service announcements to kids that they can't figure out are actually brand messages. The other big thing that's going on, and you see this in both the suburban communities and the inner cities, is what's called viral marketing, the use of person-to-person marketing and the use of kids to market to other kids. And the 60 Minutes piece I was involved in a couple of weeks ago was on a group that organizes slumber parties for tween girls to get them to market to their friends. Let me end by saying something about the impact that all of this is having on kids. And there have been other books written critical of marketing to kids, but I had to ask the question, well, so what? It's a consumer society. Everybody's being marketed to. It was only a matter of time that it got down to kids. That's an attitude that many people have. I wanted to ask the question, is this having an impact on kids? Is this hurting kids beyond some of the obvious ways that we know? For example, we know when they see alcohol and tobacco ads, either direct ads or in the movies, they're more likely to consume alcohol and tobacco. There's a lot of evidence on that. But I asked the question, does a kid who gets more involved in consumer culture, who gets more caught up in brands and stuff and being wealthy and worrying about what they have, does that have an impact on them? Does a kid who watches more media get more involved in consumer culture? And this is the question that I asked in the survey that I gave to all of those 5th and 6th graders. What I found was pretty striking. Number one, not surprising, the more exposure that kids have to TV, to video games, to movies, and other media, the more likely they are to display high levels of consumer involvement. So caring all about brands and being cool and so on and so forth. And as their consumer involvement rises, they are more likely to become depressed. Their anxiety level rises. Their level of self-esteem falls. No surprise, as one marketer said to me, what's our message? We're teaching kids that without our product, they're a nobody, they're a loser. That's a basic core message of marketing today to young people. The kids who become more consumer involved are more likely to have frequent headaches. They're more likely to have frequent stomach aches. They're more likely to be bored. And in the suburban community, what I found is that the kids who are more involved in consumer culture feel more alienated from their parents. They're more likely to fight with their parents, more likely to think their parents are uncool and do not understand them. It was interesting in the urban context where most of the kids were in single-parent households, this wasn't true. They were much more bonded to their mothers, and so their consumer involvement didn't tend to get in the way, and that was a positive thing. The conclusion of this research is that consumer culture has become a serious problem for kids, and that it's something we as adults can no longer be in denial about and really, I think, need to address in a more serious way. Thank you.
Dr. Schor, do I have to buy your book to learn any of your thoughts on how these problems you mentioned can be addressed in a consumer society as a whole?
No. As the author of The Overspent American, I will say you can take it out of the library. There is a chapter in there on solutions. You can also go to these websites, newdream.org, commercialalerts.org. There's the campaign for commercial-free childhood. In the back of my book, there are a lot of listing of all the organizations, dads and daughters, wonderful groups that are working on these, the teachers' organizations, the Pediatric Association, the NEA, the Children's Defense Fund is very concerned about this. The answer to the solution is it's not that easy. You have to do stuff at the household, so changing parenting practices, of course, and we've talked a little about that. You have to do stuff in your community, through your schools, your PTAs, et cetera. One of the big things is to get that marketing out of schools, and there are great groups that are having huge successes on that. In Seattle, they just got all marketing and all junk food out of schools through parents. One woman went into the school. She was appalled at what she saw. She organized some of her friends. She ended up getting elected to the school board. She changed the whole policies. They had exclusive soft drink contracts. They had Channel 1. They had all the bad stuff. It's all gone in Seattle. I mean, it's a fabulous success story. You have states all over the country now working to ban soft drink sales, and I think this state is one of them. I think you have a law now. But the other thing we have to have is government regulation, because we have virtually no regulation of marketing to kids, and what we do have is routinely being violated. Disney and Viacom just agreed to pay $1.5 million in fines because they are showing more commercials per hour than they are actually even allowed to, and they're allowed to show a huge amount. So we got to get on the FTC and the FCC, which have been completely lax on these issues, and say it's high time we began to protect our kids. Thank you.
This is the book, Born to Buy. Now, unfortunately, Airborne Overnight Express is misnamed. They didn't get the books here in time. We have very few left, but Dr. Schor will be happy to sign your copy. Let's express our appreciation again to her.